I'm Aaron Heilers. I'm the project manager for the Blanchard River Demonstration Farms, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to share with you. Glenn asked me to talk about what we've learned in the last 5 years, I'm going to give you some of the updates of what we've seen. Some of this information may not be earth-shattering to you, but I think it's important that we continue to hammer the same things over and over again because that's the consistent results that we're seeing from the water quality monitoring and the edge of field sites, things around the state, and it's important to hit that over and over again. So show of hands, how many of you have heard of the demonstration farms before this morning? All right, so in 5 years we are at least making progress, that people are hearing about the work that we're doing. I'm going to give you a quick background on it. I'm going to talk really fast because we got a lot of information, and if I have some time for questions, we can do that at the end. So just quick background, Farm Bureau, Ohio Farm Bureau, and the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service are the two partners behind this project that are putting the funding behind the project. It started in September of 2015, and so we're approaching the initial 5-year contract end here in 2020, and we're currently in process of extending that, hopefully expanding it in some form for another 5 years at least. The obligatory water quality picture, right? We've all have seen this picture over and over again and probably are sick of seeing it. But just to remember what we're talking about specifically in the Western Lake Erie Basin is phosphorus, right? And to draw your attention to the major culprit that we're seeing is the dissolved portion of phosphorus, and to remember that that's 100% bioavailable, and that's the problem. That's the stuff that we're having a hard time wrapping our arms around with these conservation practices is how do we capture that dissolved portion of the phosphorus that's leaving our farm fields. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Nitrogen is obviously a very important thing, and we've got, I'm going to say we a lot. I am not doing the research out there. My job is to bring the research to you guys, and so don't interpret that as I'm taking credit for these things, but I'll just say we to keep it easy. But we'll show some information about the scale of loss between nitrogen and phosphorus and the difference that we're talking about there. So the Blanchard River Watershed, if you're not familiar, you can see where it's located in the Western Lake Erie Basin. If we take a closer look here, you can see today we are in right there in Ada, so we're just outside of the watershed today, but we've got our 3 demonstration farms, the Kurt and Kellogg farm just north of Kenton, down here in the southern portion, and then the Statler operation just west of Findlay up towards the northern portion of the watershed. The 3 farmers that we work with today are not unique in the practices that they're necessarily doing on their farms. They are unique because they've opened their doors to literally thousands of visitors over the last couple of years. They've shared their economic information with me and other researchers to try to quantify how these practices have impacted their farming operations. And so I think that's important to note that they are doing things. People here today at this conference are doing a lot of great things. These guys are unique because they have lots and lots of people tromp through their operation, ask them, poke and prod at them, and ask them questions. And we have a lot of non-farm visitors that will ask blunt questions about how much money you're making on the farm. And these guys actually, they welcome the opportunity to share that information with the broader audiences. So just real quick, the Kellogg farms, they farm about 5,000 acres of corn and beans and a little bit of wheat, a father-son operation. Kurt farms about 500 acres of corn and beans, just a couple miles down the road from the Kellogg's. And then the Statlers farm about 1,000 acres now of corn, beans, and wheat. But they also have 7,000 head of wean-to-finish swine. And if you know anything about Northwest Ohio and this water quality challenge, animal agriculture has the finger of blame pointed squarely at them in the news media and with non-farm groups. And so this is a nice opportunity for us to be able to bring those type of audiences in. They get to go inside the nursery, see how the pigs are raised, and have that frank discussion about modern animal agriculture, which is very very crucial, especially when you look at the percentages. I think manure makes up about roughly 15% of the phosphorus that's produced and applied in the watershed, and yet they get a lot more of the blame than other farmers do. So our goals with this project, you can see down at the bottom there, it's showcasing traditional and innovative conservation practices. They're going to have a positive impact on water quality. That's 30,000-foot view of what we're trying to do. Make sure that these practices that we're recommending to farmers have scientific data backing them up, that they are going to actually reduce nutrient loss from the farm field. And then the challenge to the second part of that is making sure those practices are economical for the farmer to implement and trying to work through that economic picture. So diving into that a little bit more, what we're really trying to do is increase farmers' confidence in their ability to implement these practices. We see it in a lot of the survey data. Farmers are interested. We've got that 30% in the middle that they want to do something, but at some point they just decide, hey, I'm not going to do it, whether it's the weather, financial ability, their confidence to actually get it done and not have a disaster on their hands. So what we're trying to do is show them that these practices are feasible on their farming operation. And we do that with field days, tours, one-on-one workshops with the demonstration farmers themselves, lots of different ideas like that. And the second thing here is being a trusted resource for the general public. If there's anything that I've learned over 5 years, probably the number one thing is that the non-farm public wants to know what you guys are doing on your farms. The 1% in the loudest voice in the media that you see all the time, we're not going to change their minds. They do not like agriculture as it is today, and they're going to, no matter what we do, they're probably not going to change their minds. But there's a whole host of people in the middle that just have no idea the level of sophistication on your farming operations. We bring them in, they get to sit in the tractor, they get to have that discussion with the farmers, and at the end of the day, and this has happened multiple times, they have told us that after we showed them soil test data, prescriptions, yield monitors, those sorts of things that we take for granted nowadays, they literally say, we had no idea how sophisticated farming is today. And they literally think that you back that manure tanker up to the creek and let her go, or that tank of manure has got 6,000 pounds or gallons of phosphorus in it compared to what it's actually got in it. So we need to do a better job of opening up our farms and letting people in to see just what we're doing. And I know that can be tough to do, but if we're going to get through this public relations challenge that we've got right now, we've got to be able to step outside of our comfort zone and let people in to our farms. So the backbone of what we're doing is tied in with Kevin King's work at the USDA Ag Research Service, his Edge of Field Monitoring Network. If you're not familiar with it, you probably can't see all the dots up here in Northwest Ohio, but he's got 20 edge of field sites, paired sites like this, that are monitoring the surface and subsurface drainage from 2 of the 3 demonstration farmers that we've got. And so we take a lot of his information and transfer it to our tours and workshops that we put on. And so they're measuring 2 fields side by side, if you're not familiar. And one of those fields, the practices will be changed after about 2 to 3 years. And that change in practice then, after they monitor that for another 2 to 3 years, is how we can then tell which conservation practice is impacting water quality the best. And maybe some of these practices aren't doing as good of a job as we think they are. That's important information, because then we can maybe shift that the interest level away from that practice into another one that makes more of an impact downstream. So some of those treatment practices that Kevin's got on his 20-plus sites, you can see here a lot of them in the field, or the 4R category. So looking at fertilizer versus manure, the rate of what we put our nutrients on, the timing, the placement, tillage systems, cover crops, You get over here on the edge of field, we got drainage water management, some bioreactors and filters, and then in streams, the two-stage ditch that is being monitored as well. So the recommendations that group is putting forward is one that we are piggybacking off of as well. And you can see here is getting every farmer to follow the 4R practices, and we'll dive into these a little bit here. Developing a water management plan for every field that you operate, and then improving soil health and reducing soil erosion. Those three broad categories are what we're talking about every day on the demonstration farms. So again, I'm gonna cut through these pretty quick and try to hit the high points. The first thing you should be doing, you pick up a new piece of ground, or if you've been farming it for 40 years, is soil testing, right? You don't know what your rate should be if you don't know what's actually in your farm field to begin with. And that probably seems pretty basic for most of you in the room. But what we did was look at testing one of our demonstration farms 3 different ways, using the somewhat standard methods that are out there now, so a whole field 2.5 acre grid or a zone soil test. Sampled them the same day, sent them to the same lab, and this is what the results came back for those 3 different samples. You can see here, if we're looking just at phosphorus, the recommendations on that one field varied from 200 pounds an acre all the way down to 58 pounds per acre on the zone. That may be an anomaly, but I think it probably makes pretty common sense that if you increase your level of data management and how much sampling you're taking out in that field, you're going to get better results, right? From an economic standpoint, we're not having to pay for 8,600 pounds of phosphorus or MAP fertilizer going out there. But from an environmental standpoint, that's 8,600 pounds that's not out in the environment, and the other fertilizer that we are putting out there is in a better place within the field. And so, again, making sure that every farmer is soil sampling, increasing your level of sampling to make sure that you're getting consistent results and good data that you can base your nutrient recommendations off of is the point with this slide. So the second part of that is then the source, right? The first thing was the rate. The second part is the source, making sure that we're matching where we're getting our nutrients from what the analysis is in here with what the crop actually needs. So obviously we can look at commercial fertilizer. That's a pretty simple analysis, right? But the other one is manure. We need to do a better job of valuing what is in that manure pit, whether on a hog farm, a chicken farm, or a dairy operation. For way too long, we have over-applied or not accounted for these nutrient values, and in some instances drove up our soil test values. So doing a better job of knowing what's in that pit, matching that to your soil test, and then making sure that your crop can utilize what you're putting out there. Soil test phosphorus values, what we see with the edge of field data is that the higher your soil test values get, the more likelihood you have of a loss. It's not a one-to-one correlation, but it is a pretty strong correlation. As that number goes up, you stand a greater chance to lose phosphorus. So we need to do a better job of making sure that our soil test values are down in that recommended range so that we can reduce our risk of loss. The third 4R is the time, and I'm going to spend just a little bit more on this. Glenn touched on it. I can, by a show of hands or a shake of your head, how many of you think that weather patterns have changed over the course of your farming career, right? Well, we dove into the data here in Ohio a little bit more. What this bar chart is showing, because you probably can't see it in the back, each one of these sets of bars is a city in northwest Ohio. So this is Bowling Green, Salina, Findlay, and Defiance. This is looking at 1-inch or greater rain events per decade. So on the left of each one of those sets is the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, all the way up. The green bar is the 2010s. So you can see the general trend over the last 50-plus years of more rain events greater than 1 inch or greater. And then the blue or the green lines here, that data is 2018. So we don't have last year's data mixed into this yet. So general trend is it's going up. If you're in the southern part of Ohio, you can see the same general trend here. The blue line is the actual amount of rainfall since that's got 1945 up to 2015. And you can see that, the average is 38.5 inches, but we haven't had the average since about 1994. It's been up above that ever since. So this is a statewide issue of more rainfall events. If you break that data down into a different form, you look at the time of the year when that rainfall came. Again, so this is looking at Bowling Green. The orange line is 1990 to 2018. The blue line is 1960 to 1989. And you can see that that rainfall pattern has shifted into the spring months, into that April, May time frame when we're out there applying nutrients, trying to get field work done. And again, anecdotally, you can probably figure that out, that it's not as easy as it used to be. Aaron Wilson with Ohio State does a lot of good presentations, a lot of good work in this space. But this is his chart that he just put out showing the general trend that we're losing about 5 days of suitable fieldwork days in both April and October since 1995. So just reinforcing that those opportunities are getting less and less. June, however, is actually on a flat trend, maybe just a tick upwards, that we're seeing better opportunities to get out there into the field. How does that tie into this? Maybe it's Glenn's work, side dressing corn. There's other opportunities that maybe to put fertilizer out at a different time of the year outside of our traditional windows to try to get away from these heavy rainfalls a little bit. And this just kind of backs that up. What's that look like on our farming operations? This is what it looks like, right? You've probably seen this. You get a gully washer after a gully washer, and it's driving nutrients downstream. Dr. Laura Johnson at Heidelberg says about 70 to 90% of the nutrient loading into the Western Basin comes in about 10 rain events per year. So it's the big rains are pushing nutrients downstream, and we've got to figure out a way to make our farms more resilient to that type of weather events. The last 4R here is the placement, right? I'll show this chart as just kind of the backdrop. This data is, you can see here from a small plot research study that was done a few years ago, showing about a 70% reduction in this study when you inject or till that fertilizer into the soil profile as opposed to broadcasting it on top of the ground. Now, as you get into the full field testing, the edge of field testing, that number comes down quite a bit, so I don't want to overstate this, but it still shows a really good reduction when we're getting that fertilizer, that nutrient, worked into the soil profile. Now, I talk to a lot of non-farm groups, and so I usually have to explain what these practices are. You guys know what this is, strip tillage. The H2 Ohio money is putting a lot of dollars towards subsurface placement. So, they're putting a lot of value behind this practice, and we've got to figure out a way, how do we get more of these type of toolbars out onto the marketplace. This is the Kellogg's operation here. They've actually purchased a 24-row old planter. They're going to retrofit it. They got about $65,000 in it when they retrofit it to do the same type of strip till, just at a cheaper rate. That rig cost them about $180,000. Obviously, a smaller operation can't afford to do something like that. But if we can get guys thinking outside the box and taking old equipment and retrofitting it, maybe you can make it a little more feasible and accomplish the same goal of getting that nutrient below the soil surface. This is the Statlers doing what they do, injecting manure below the soil surface. So again, trying to get that nutrient underneath the soil so that it's not exposed to these large rain events that we've got. So that's the 4 R's, and I want to hit it again. Make sure that every producer is practicing those to the best of their ability. Some of these may not fit exactly to what your operation's doing, but we need the masses of farmers doing every one of those 4R practices in some shape or form if we're going to make a difference downstream. Water management is the second thing. We can do all the 4R practices we want to do, but if we don't slow the water leaving our farm fields, we're not going to make as much of a difference as we need to make to meet the goals in Lake Erie. Water is the vector, right? Nutrients aren't leaving the farm and going downstream if the water's not leaving the farm. And so we've got to kind of think about that in a different way now of how we can slow water down. How can we stop water in some cases? How can we treat the water in some cases? A couple of the ways that we can do that is drainage water management. Up here in Northwest Ohio, that's more of a popular practice in the flat landscapes. You can see the box sitting on top of the tile structure there, looking down inside of it. Stopping that water flow through portions of the year that we don't need that tile to be flowing can be a piece of the puzzle to reduce that water volume leaving the field. We had earlier results that were showing a pretty good reduction, maybe a 40 or 50% reduction in nutrient loss with this practice of reduction of nutrient loss. Now the edge of field data is kind of pulling that back a little bit. I think Kevin's on the agenda tomorrow. He may talk about it a little bit more. But again, don't want to oversell the practice that it's going to be the silver bullet and save all that we need to save. It's a piece of the puzzle, and that number is maybe down around the 10-15% range. Blind inlets. Again, if we think about slowing water down from leaving the field, this is a practice that I think we can all recognize that we've seen something like that out in one of our fields or in the neighbor's fields. You think about that, all that water is going directly into that pipe right downstream without any filtering capacity of the soil itself. And so we take that out, we install a filter, something like this, force that water through different layers of media, and again, reduce the flow. The water still gets off the field in an appropriate amount of time, but we've got some layers there to help capture sediment and the nutrients, the dissolved reactive phosphorus, if we mix some other material on this top layer here. Quickly, the two-stage ditch. This is one that we've got on Chris Kurt's farm. That one is not being monitored. They've got another one being monitored here. This two-stage ditch, if you see the difference in the two channels, this two-stage has a floodplain built into it. And again, if we look at trying to slow water down and allow it to be treated, when that water rises in a heavy rain event, it spreads out on the bench. Water spreads out, it slows down, it can drop out the sediment that's in there. They've also seen some good results on nitrogen, having some denitrification going on. Phosphorus is still kind of to be determined, and so we'll see how this develops. But again, using the network of agricultural ditches that we have across the state as an opportunity to hold that water and not deliver it downstream so quickly is something that we may have to develop here over the next couple of years. And here you can see how that channel operates out in the landscape. Reducing soil erosion and improving soil health. So I think I've got a video here. I'll jump through it. This is what that same erosion feature, or we had the runoff event here. That's what it looks like when the water's all done. We may have to think about putting grass waterways in areas that we've never had to before. I know on my operation, starting to get some gullies on a no-till cover crop scenario that, we may have to end up looking at putting grass waterways in to deal with these heavier and heavier rainfall events. I'm going to cut through this. They came in and actually shaped that out and seeded that to a grass waterway. I think this is the last practice I have, cover crops, right? How many of you plant cover crops? Why are you planting cover crops? I'll pick on somebody up front here.
Don't ask me. We primarily grow them for feed.
Feed, okay. Feed. Anybody do it for water quality? Hold your soil in place, reduce phosphorus. So this is a picture I took at my operation showing how it's doing a good job of keeping sediment from moving downstream. You can see here sediment coming down the side ditch from a field that wasn't cover cropped. You can see the difference in the water that's leaving those two fields. What they're seeing with the edge of field data, and I'll say this is preliminary data like all research is, it can change as more and more information comes in, is that cover crops are doing a great job on nitrogen. right? It's going out there, it's binding all that nitrogen up, holding it, releasing it the next year as that plant dies. Phosphorus is showing a pretty negligible result at this point, especially DRP. Now that could change as they get more information on maybe a broader mix of cover crops, maybe a longer term situation where a guy's been doing it for 20 plus years. But right now that's kind of the hole in the data, is those long-term cover crop operations, what they're seeing from phosphorus reduction. They are seeing good reductions in the volume of water leaving the field, though, when you do put cover crops into the rotation. And so that's, again, as we think about water management, it's a very important piece of the puzzle. So just to hit on those things again, 4 R's, making sure every farmer is practicing those 4R practices to the best of your ability. Developing a water management plan for every field that you operate on, thinking about how you can slow that water down in some fashion. That may be organic matter and cover crops, and maybe that's the best that you can do. Maybe it's a wetland, a broad spectrum of things that you can do there. And then soil health through no-till cover crops, trying to accomplish those things while meeting all the other goals of the 4 R's as well can be a bit of a challenge. Last thing here is that I kind of like this picture. Again, going back to what I've learned over the last 5 years of this project, is these people over here are going to tell us, or tell these guys, what they're going to do on their farming operation. Maybe the guys that have been farming for a long time, maybe that's not anything new, right? The public always ends up dictating how you run your operation, but it feels like today we're in like hyperspeed of that the public and politicians are going to dictate how we farm, and we've got to adapt to it, and we've got to figure out a way to make it work for our farming operations if we want to continue on. So the last thing I always end with is to show you the scale of loss that they are seeing on the edge of field data. So if you've heard me talk before, you don't get an answer. If you haven't heard me talk, you do get an answer. How many pounds of phosphorus are they showing that we're losing on per acre across the western Lake Erie Basin? Come on. There you go. 1 pound. He's been paying attention. 1 pound of phosphorus is what they're showing that we're losing on those edge of field sites. This is 1 pound. So that's 1 pound of total P that we're losing. So you think about the volume of phosphorus that's being put out there, and we're losing 1 pound. How much does a pound of phosphorus cost? 50 cents. Have you heard me talk before? 50 cents. And we've got to save roughly 40%. That's what they're saying is the number in the western Lake Erie Basin. So, what, 25 cents worth of fertilizer or nutrients is what we're trying to save from leaving an average farm field to help clean up the lake. But yet we have to do all of these practices that we've talked about that cost a decent amount of money. Now, I won't say that there can't be a savings on some of these practices that help your operation, but that's the scale that we're up against from a phosphorus standpoint. Nitrogen, that's a much bigger beast, very important, but on the scale of 50 to 100 pounds per acre that we're losing of nitrogen. So, again, a very important nutrient in the grand scheme of things. So that's all I've got.